We're live. Hi. So, good afternoon. Welcome to another bear market noon of building. And speaking of building, we're very fortunate to have Raghuram Trilok, if I'm getting that correct.
Trikutam.
Trikutam. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, but Raghuram is good.
Raghuram Trikutam. RT, that's a cool acronym to stand for.
Perfect.
And we have Arun Jadhav, co-founders of Descrypt, which is one of India's leading crypto taxation platforms. And we are here to understand them in their journey as humans of Web3 in the effort that we're trying to put across with the Graviton podcast. So Raghu and Arun, thank you for your time. Thank you for putting us on your calendar.
Thanks, Shom.
And welcome to the Graviton podcast.
Thanks, Shom, for having us here.
All right. So before we got started with this episode, Raghu and Arun were walking me through their journey of how they, first met and started working together, which is an interesting, inspiring, serendipitous journey. So to give you some backdrop, Arun and Raghu are both very enviable in the Indian founder space. They qualify for what is known as the dream team. Arun is from IIT Bombay. Raghu is from IIT Guwahati. They started working together at Freecharge in Bangalore. Their professional journey has been interesting ever since then. Their paths crossed again at Grab, and now they run Descrypt together. So before we take a dive into the team that went behind Descrypt and the vision that led to India's I think first and leading crypto taxation platform, we'll quickly run through their journey. So Arun was walking me through his journey into the payment space. From what I understand, he is a technology payments veteran and he's quite coveted in this space. He's been it through some of the most challenging consumer applications such as mobility. So there are repeating gigs of that nature. So yeah, Arun, if you could walk us through your journey.
Good. So I started my journey back in 2005 with Amazon straight out of college. So I was fortunate to be involved in with one of the most terrific teams that you could imagine that Amazon was fortunate to have assembled at that point in time. From that cohort of people, just about every other startup has grown out of them in India, right? Like you take Flipkart, Myntra, like Bank Bazaar, Infibeam, the Bluestone, just about everything, right? So I know the co-founders
This is like that Dazed and Confused movie of the startup world.
yeah. So that for 2 years, the cohort worked together, and then from 2007 and 8 onwards, everyone went on to start their own startups, which have become quite household names at this point in time. Yeah. So then I was there for about 7 years, then moved to Freecharge when Kunal was looking to establish Freecharge's full-time R&D out of Bangalore. And then then I built a team, the tech team, predominantly the backend tech team, and through that journey saw Freecharge grow, go from strength to strength.
So that's the other thing that sets you aside. You were Kunal Shah's first hire in Bangalore for Freecharge.
One of the first, like one more guy along with us. Two of us started together. There's a small 2-bedroom house in Indiranagar. So we started there. So I was fortunate to have worked with Kunal for like pretty much on a daily basis for like 4 years. I learned a lot as a group, as a person, and we saw again. So I saw the entire journey of Freecharge from the initial days to exit, and then year beyond. And then I moved on to Grab, where again I headed backend team to launch multiple, similar product, but across multiple geographies, kind of different kind of challenge.
And this is which year, just for my reference?
This is in 2017, 18.
Okay. So Grab is at that stage trying to tackle some of the more advanced challenges associated with payments in the mobility space. So
it was trying to get into payments to begin with. So Grab was until at that point in time mostly, in fact not mostly, exclusively a mobility app, similar to Uber, very similar to Uber. So they wanted to diversify into the payments and then get into the super app category space, which was one of the most hottest sort of space at that point in time.
The cold fusion of consumer apps.
Exactly. And then we were successful to an extent, and then it is still retained that ethos even to this day. If you look at Grab, so they have gone from strength to strength. We launched similar product in multiple countries, uh, tackled some of the earliest regulatory challenges because Southeast Asia at that point in time was maybe 5-6 years behind India in terms of everything, in terms of tech, product, regulatory.
That's
So we
surprising.
had to work, yeah. So we had to work with regulators to help them understand how digital payments work. What does it mean? Because their idea of everything was like quite old and arcane. So we had to educate them. We had to work with regulators to make things happen. So it was quite fascinating learning experience, not just engineering, but how do you work with multiple stakeholders who have their own sort of tensions, right? Like
And this
business people
includes
want to.
state representative policymakers from
Yeah.
Southeast Asia.
Absolutely. So we
Fascinating.
had the people lobbying on our behalf, and then try to educate them as well. At the same time, we were helping them draft some of the initial, regulatory guidelines at that point in time. So it was quite a fascinating learning experience.
This
So at
is
that
one of
point
the
in time.
questions that I wanted to ask you as part of this conversation. I think so far technology, the payment space in general, digital payments and the state have pretty much worked seamlessly, wherein lobbying has not necessarily played a very big role, at least in the public realm. So do you see that changing in the Web3 space? Because I think we'll get to that question again later when we tackle regulations as a thing. But yeah, interesting
Sure,
that you mentioned
sure.
this. You've already witnessed a phase of this. My first observation about the two of you having worked during the free charge adoption era is that you have seen it all essentially. You've seen the initial wave of people coming to terms with the idea of making digital payments in India, for starters, which was
Yeah,
not a
yeah,
common
yeah. Yep.
practice. The landscape just sort of changed rapidly. And now, as far as mainstream adoption is concerned, which is what the conversation is going to be about, you are one of the earliest movers in taxation, which is like a layer 2 problem to solve once adoption is tackled. So you are looking at adoption with this never before confidence. You have this angle because you've seen it happen. So I want to understand if you see any similarities in the challenges and the way things play out in terms of large scale solutions and larger solutions emerging from stateside, in terms of policies, in terms of how people generally respond, user behavior. I think that's a threefold wisdom that I would love to take away from the two of you. But carry on.
Sure. Yeah. So then I worked for a decent stint at Uber, tackling some of the their payments challenges, which is what I was talking about. So if you remember, Uber when they started, they only had a credit card as a payment method.
Yes.
Before they realized that they had to work with local payments providers such as Paytm and others to make
Paytm
it
got such a big boost during the Uber
exactly.
installation phase. I
It
remember
was
that.
it was
It's
in
why I
fact if
have Paytm on my phone today. It was
exactly,
because of Uber.
and then I think Paytm and Uber represents one of the best symbiotic relationship you could ever imagine. That
True.
that had occurred, right? Like Uber needed
It
to get into
established
India, and then
Paytm's minimum balance idea virtually. Everybody sort of got into that.
exactly,
You need to have 300
True.
bucks in your Paytm wallet because otherwise
exactly,
scamming. That
exactly,
was brilliant.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly,
You guys
exactly. So yeah, so
actively
I
executed that, like
yeah. So
with
no,
that
so I
foresight.
came in. I came in just after that. So my team helped launch Uber, enable like local payment methods, which are very long tail in nature. Like think of Africa, right? Like every country has a local payment method. Think of India and then multiply it by like, I don't know, 12, 13. So each country has its own payment method. They have their own idiosyncrasies. So we had to work with it. And it's similar to Latin America. Latin America is also has its own very unique idiosyncratic, culturally rooted payment methods. We had to work with them to make it happen. Like to give you one example, there uh, people still go to the stores to pay the electricity bill. So they have established their own network of
2023.
that. Yeah, 2023.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Still, it is called the boleto. In the it's a payment by bill. So you take a electricity bill and then go to a local store, and then you
Finally,
pay.
three Indians having a first world conversation.
Yeah. So fascinatingly, so they have established that offline payment network, and then we tapped into that to load Uber's cash as a digital currency, right? Like
Wow.
you pay like $20, and then you're somehow magically your Uber Pay wallet gets loaded, and then you take a ride. So that was that's
This was
what we
something we did
established.
in
Considering the
Indonesia too,
effort
right?
that consumer mobility and anything which has like an impact on daily lives of people, daily consumer lifestyles, I think those applications have a lot of potential in terms of driving adoption for any payment method eventually down the line. So do you think that's one of the things worth looking for? Like, would you rather lobby to the largest at scale consumer products such as Uber, DoorDash, and the likes, to sort of adopt decentralized payment methods, or accept crypto, just in layman terms, in order to drive adoption? I would it, in your opinion, create the same effect as it did for Paytm in India?
Absolutely, absolutely right. Like it's a no-brainer if you think about it. Like you said it yourself. Like what Uber did to Paytm. Imagine what it can do to, let's say, USDT. Let's start with even stable currencies. Not even talk about some long tail currencies, right? Like if Uber started accepting USDT or USDC, the stable currencies, like then adoption will obviously go up. It's a no-brainer.
Adoption, yeah, I mean, like, I'd like to add to that. Adoption will go, but it's a bit of a chicken and egg, because as with fiat, the ubiquitous nature of it would enable you to kind of use, let's say, your INR or your dollar to pay in multiple places. Now, only for Uber to take it off will not work. It would also need your regulators to come forward and say this is an acceptable payment mechanism. And that's
We have
when,
the larger
I mean, of course,
conversation,
you'll probably need, yeah, you'll
whether
probably
it's a
need an
currency, an
anchor
asset, or a
merchant.
security.
Yeah, that's for a different day, probably, or if you want to, in this discussion. But as an anchor merchant, what Arun is saying is absolutely right. You will be able to drive adoption, but that possibly won't be, it would be scratching
It
the
cannot be
surface in that
it
sense.
cannot be a single point factor driving the revolution.
Absolutely,
One of
absolutely. In fact, it would be an add-on. Fundamentally, acceptance of, I mean, like, as we were just discussing a while ago, right? You need to first figure out if it's a currency or a security.
Yeah.
It even begins at that. So yeah.
We'll tackle that frustration a little later in the conversation today. Okay, getting back to Arun's journey.
Yeah, so so after Uber, like we got hit by COVID, and then
Yeah,
at that point in time, I decided to move back to India, and then me, Raghu, and then our third co-founder, again our
Abhishek.
similar journey as ours, Abhishek. Yeah, so we
Yeah.
started talking, and then we wanted to do something together, and then start our own journey, and then crypto, to be honest, was not on our mind at that point in time. But as we started, brainstorming, speaking to more users, you realize that crypto is something that is going to be big. And we knew that, as with any tech or any product, it will go through boom bust cycle. So we knew what we were getting into even back in 2021. So we
This
wanted
was the
to.
initial, this was the last big rally that I remember, which was happening back in May 2021. Dogecoin suddenly became
21,
a
yeah,
huge thing. I
yeah,
remember
yeah,
dad
yeah.
calling me and asking me, have I missed out on not buying Dogecoin? And there was a tricky conversation.
So those are usually a sign of peak, like when
Yeah.
your relatives start calling you. Yeah,
You
correct.
guys must have had a lot of that, no? Happening to you once. So round about this time, you have decided to do something in the crypto space.
Yeah. So like
Yeah, correct.
2021, yeah. So like early mid 2021, we wanted to do something in the crypto space. So we went with a blank slate. To be honest, we did not know what to do, and we did not want to go with the preconceived notion. So we wanted to build something that users want, as opposed to building something and then trying to figure out how to sell it. So because
More
we
on
know that
Jacob's
from our
law. Yeah.
experience, yeah, so our
More
experience,
from,
that has not worked. So we have like multiple horror stories of it. I can digress. So yeah, so we spoke to, I think, close to 200 users, directly or indirectly. Spoke to, I mean, literally we spoke, like we had a conversation with them. And that's when a couple of patterns and themes started emerging. Tracking being one of the biggest pain points, and then taxation being a because
Big
there is
question
no
mark,
easy way to
really.
track. Yeah, because there is no easy way to track, it leads to being unable to figure out what you owe as a taxes. And then we started, building products along those lines. So probably Raghu can add more.
Yeah, so
more to
now
that.
we try to do this, retrospectively, like how they're doing sitcoms these days. So I want to arrive at this juncture in time with you, Raghu. Now, so let's rewind a little bit. Go back to you, right out of IIT Bombay. You too had your first exposure to
Actually, Guwahati. But yeah.
Go
IIT
ahead.
Guwahati. I'm so sorry. Yeah, yeah. And
So yeah,
then
I'll keep it short probably. I mean, not take as much time as Arun did. So yeah, out of IIT Guwahati, worked in a telco company for 4 years. Didn't like it, and that's when the startup bug bit me.
okay,
And I mean, it was a very wild call in the sense that my parents or folks who knew me were like, "Look, you're kind of walking out of a good job in an MNC and doing something very wacky." And that was when I joined Redbus, probably the fourth or the fifth engineer back in the days. Quite unknown. In fact, probably Redbus was doing around 200, 250 orders a day. By the time I moved out, we almost hit a lakh a day. So joined them and got an opportunity to work very closely with the founders, build things grounds up, saw through the acquisition. Then moved from Redbus for a brief period. Was at Flipkart. It was too big to my liking by then, but had a good fun ride. Even though it was 8 to 9 months, had a good
you were
fun ride.
part of the product team at Flipkart.
No. Both of us code. Abhishek two
Okay.
codes. The three of us are engineers. Yeah. So I had actually joined in as an engineering manager in Flipkart back in 2013, and uh, probably one of the youngest ones at that time. And yeah, man, it was a good ride. As I said, had fun working with a bunch of guys out there. But then got a call and were like, "Look, I mean, why do you want to do that? Why don't you write code again?" And I said, "Sure." And that's when I moved to Freecharge,
Okay.
and that's where I met Arun. Abhishek, of course, I had worked with him at Redbus, the third co-founder that Arun mentioned. So joined Freecharge, and it was like within 6 months, you kind of hit Abhishek up and said, "Look, you two come and join." And so that's how the three of us worked together at Freecharge. We met
The
there,
three of you
three
keep
of us,
gravitating together, like throughout this
quite a
story.
bit. Quite a bit. In fact, Abhishek and I worked at Cred too for a brief period. So, yeah, anyway, so yeah, we were at Freecharge again, as Arun said, saw through the acquisition. I was leading the entire front end charter around mobile and web at Freecharge. Then after that, I took a small break of 3 months and got a nice little ping from person in Singapore saying, "Look, we want to set up a center in India. Would you like to, kind of take up the mantle?" And that's when I spoke to Hoyling, Anthony, who are the founders of Grab, and
This
a
is when
bunch of
Grab
folks there.
happens.
And this is when Grab happens, yeah. And so I, in fact, joined Grab as a consultant because, I mean, they didn't set up the legal aspects of setting Grab up as an LLP in India wasn't done by them.
Okay.
So I had joined along with another friend of ours from Freecharge, who was into HR, who is into HR. She's still with Freecharge. She's still with Grab. So both of us, kind of, it started from scratch. Had to incorporate, hunt for space for the office, start speaking to people, and I realized it's too much work. So I just called Arun and said, "Would you like to join them?" And Arun said, "Sure." So that's how
this
Arun,
this this is
came
how
on
they
board. And
show intelligence agencies recruiting in sci-fi, in like good stories. Like
But potentially, yeah. I'm not, it wasn't that tough though. So yeah, we started recruiting and quickly realized that we'll also need someone who will handle, the back end engineering aspects, while I handle the front end aspects for GrabPay. So that's how Arun came on board, and together we built out the entire center.
you two
Uh,
have org building history together. That is insane.
Yeah, I mean, like we started off with what I mean, I was one, but by the time Arun joined, we were probably 4 or 5 and Grab. That's
Four,
it.
five, yeah, about that, yeah.
Yeah, 5 maybe. And by the time we moved out, it was almost 150. So yeah, in fact, a lot of folks are still in touch. We love conversing with them, picking their brains, and the other way around. So yeah, so that was a stint, good, lovely 2.3 years at Grab, then moved to Cred, brief stint, and then moved to Google. And at Google, I was handling again, I was in payments. Very fortunate to work with Pankaj, who's now VP Engineering at Coinbase. He's also one of our angels. So worked with Pankaj out there, worked with AK Amrish Kenge, who heads Google Pay India. So yeah, again, 3 years out there, and then moved out, and Arun was back in India by then. Yeah, we founded Descrypt.
So this is where things get interesting for me. You have both of you have spent time in the earliest stages of digital payment adoption, and then so if you keep the first credit card payment on one side, or what Freecharge was trying to achieve on one side of the timeline, and then Cred on the other side of the timeline, which is I think for the Web2 era, the most futuristic app out there so far. I don't use a credit card. I still have figured out a way to have Cred on my phone, and I love it for the UI. And we keep discussing. And even in my previous org, we used to go gaga over how next gen it really seemed to be at first glance. You have a hang of how abrupt, or how much of a leap it seems for the consumer to sort of start looking at today's crypto native interfaces. For example, my father and I hardly have conversations around the subject, because he's sort of taken a look at some of the wallets and the signature process, and he's decided that it's just too much for him. And now you are tackling such an interesting area, because HNIs who are interested in cryptocurrencies purely for its speculative advantages, or the kind of people that ended up attaching a price to go early Ethereum testnet tokens. You're dealing with that crowd that understands the business of making money, but are not necessarily that tech adept. Has that posed to be a challenge? Did you consider this as a challenge head on while heading into this space? At what stage did the three of you decide you wanted to tackle taxation in crypto?
So taxation was a bit of an afterthought, I'll be honest. As Arun was mentioning,
you started with something else?
Yeah, I mean, tracking. That's still fundamentally what the platform is about, right? So when we were on a bunch of TG channels, and we were speaking to those 200 that Arun mentioned, the most common thread around all of it was that having an ability to track your digital assets across exchanges and chains is broken, and continues to be the case. I mean, you kind of use a few products and use Descrypt, and you'll kind of understand. And the reasons are multiple. I mean, if you pick more of the centralized exchanges, they have no incentive to maintain their developer APIs the way they should be maintained. Yeah. And on-chain, of course, I mean, on-chain is slightly more robust, but then fetching data on-chain is also not a straightforward problem. So if you're a crypto investor and you've let's say purchased some tokens on KuCoin, some tokens on Coinbase, you've moved it on-chain to your Ethereum wallet, and you now want to, let's say, invest in a liquidity protocol, none of this could be tracked in a proper fashion. And that's where Descrypt began. In fact, to date, our focus is on building the most robust tracking experience, like as a horizontal platform. That's the focus. Now, the vertical angle of taxation appears over this horizontal. And you build this fantastic platform, you also need to know how to monetize it, right? So that's where taxation came into picture, where we said that since we track your assets in the most accurate fashion, we would also be able to, kind of assist you in getting your crypto P&L reports in the most accurate fashion.
As a verified audit.
The taxation angle kicked in. Verified, I mean, how do you define verification here, right? We are verifying it, but from our user standpoint, all those who've been using Descrypt have, kind of been saying that this kind of beats everything else. Whatever I do on a certain exchange, whatever I do on a certain chain appears here.
I
That's
relate to the
magical in that
problem
sense. So
because
it's
even for me, I don't know. I have Trust Wallet on my phone, and I have two MetaMask IDs, one of which I keep switching. And that I right now, I think I would say if you ask me where my tokens were, I'd say all over the place. That's really, even I don't have a complete hang of where everything is. I don't know if I remember all my seed phrases correctly, if it's
you
all
should
stored
use
in the right.
Descrypt then.
So that's the you're hitting at me as one of the target audiences. That's interesting. So tracking, and then taxation. I think the buzzword that's around is everybody speaks of the 30% tax. Nobody really knows how it is going to get. I mean, it's one of the most ambiguous conversation topics. I am coming from the background of being a layman who understands Form 16B. You guys have Form 8949 listed on your website. You serve the US crypto taxation model. Walk me through how tough that, I mean, how simple that journey can be for a user like me who does not. I hope you understand. Somebody who understands
Yep.
Form 16B because they're used to it in at the workplace.
Arun?
Yeah, so for a typical US resident, right? So the generating a tax report is fairly straightforward. So that's what we have spent an enormous time to design the workflow in such a way that we don't dumb it down completely so as to be inaccurate. So because we
Okay.
want to strike a balance between accuracy and user experience. To give you one example, there is something called cost basis, so which is a fundamental requirement for you to calculate your loss or gain. Cost is nothing but how much you have paid to acquire a certain cryptocurrency,
Understood.
and then how much you sell is the selling price or disposition price, and the difference between that is a gain or loss. Fairly simple math. Now to understand, in given the nature of the cryptocurrency, it is possible that we don't know the cost basis or the acquisition cost of some of the cryptocurrencies because they would have bought it on Coinbase and then transferred it to Ethereum and then transferred it to somewhere else, right? And then when they start tracking the Descrypt, it is possible that we don't know at what point in time they purchased it. So we may not have that history. So we don't, when we hit certain such cases, we don't assume certain things and then start spit out some random values. Instead, we highlight those transactions and ask the users explicitly to tell us, hey, what is the cost basis that you purchase this cryptocurrency at? And then we help them understand. For example, if they remember, it's possible again, right? Like they may not know the cost basis, but if they can tell us the date on which they purchased it, then we can tell them. We will fetch the cost as on that point in time, and then we fill that value for them, and we assist them to be as accurate as possible.
So this is like
So
an automated assistant with access to Block Explorer, which can track those transactions during that particular date phase. And
exactly.
interesting.
And then they don't even have to. We do the heavy lifting of talking to the Block Explorer or whatever the pricing APIs. And then to make sure that the pricing itself is accurate, we fetch price from multiple sources, from the exchanges, from the on-chain, and so on and so forth. For example, if you bought it on Ethereum, right, like through DYDX, and then we fetch the on-chain price at that point in time. Or if you bought it on Binance, we fetch that price. And again, the price calculation is itself is not a straightforward challenge, I would say, because uh, if a coin is not liquid, if there is no deep enough, if the liquidity is not that deep enough, then the pricing, the variance will become haywire, right? Like because given the volatility of the cryptocurrency, it can swing either way in like 1,000% within a single day, within a single hour for that matter. So we keep all those things into consideration to fetch the most as accurate price as possible within a 5-minute window, and we are trying to reduce that time duration as well. So yeah, I mean, behind the scenes, lot of multiple challenges, lot of details and nuances that we have solved that problem for the consumer to make sure that we present the most accurate information picture to the user, and then based on that they can take an informed decision based on that.
So
And to your question, Shum, I mean, this Form 8949 is very similar to our Form 16, as you had kind of mentioned, right? So, I mean, like US residents understand what it is.
okay.
What we do is we generate the Form 8949 out for them. And all that they need to do beyond that is upload it on TurboTax or probably even the IRS's website. And yeah, that's about it. Tax filing is seamless.
You give them like ready to use documentation for their taxation claims.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
So,
yes.
That's actually great. So what I took away is I think ClearTax started doing this for the Web2 space, for like originally for the as far as I remember, as in people who did not want to get a chartered accountant back in the day, they positioned themselves. I know Akash Bapna was one of my college seniors who interestingly was one of the Flipkart engineering guys as well, then moved to set up ClearTax. Yeah, team used to look up to him a lot. He was a legend in the hostel. So he and yeah, he had.
By the way, we have an interesting thing to put in.
Don't tell me Akash
Founder of
Bapna is
ClearTax. No, founder of ClearTax is also an investor in Descrypt. So,
very nice.
Harshal Gupta.
Like I said, I keep getting more and more convinced that this is the most. So you guys are fulfilling like Apollo Coelho prophecy in so many ways. If you look at it, like if you connect the dots going backwards, truly in that sense, you've been in the right places. You spent time understanding the right markets, understanding adoption from the right angles, and the obviously hanging out with the right crowd. And now you're in the space. So when the three of you decided that you want to do this, going back to the tracking bit, not just the taxation business, how long did it take you guys to come up with an MVP, put it out into the market? How long did it take for you guys to get noticed by your first wave of capital backers?
So we actually raised even before the product was built. I'll be very upfront about it. We showed what potentially could the product look like. And that was, and we've been fortunate in that sense. We'll be stupid to say, anything else. We've been fortunate. We did manage to raise, and then but of course, at the same time, we didn't take time to launch the product. We were of an opinion that, and this is something which we see in Web3. There are products which are probably in hibernation for 18 months and counting, and we don't understand that coming from the Web2 space. So for us, it was all about speed. So we wrote the first line of code in May 2022, and we were live by July. To a very small community, beta.
So roughly 60 days. That is impressive.
60 days. That was around the time period, right, Arun? If I'm getting this correctly.
Yeah, about that, yes.
Yeah. And we had a small beta community, which, kind of kept trying out the product till almost November. And November, we did more of a public launch. And taxation, on the other hand, for US, we launched by the 24th of Jan. For India, pretty soon. So that's been the journey in terms of getting products out. A pretty healthy user base right now. More and more users signing up on a daily basis.
That's interesting. So you guys, because you came from that, like the background of building and shipping products and setting up orgs, most of the questions that I have that I usually line out for founders is on the nature of how hard was it to get your initial team in place? How did you hire your CTO? But I guess those things never were a real challenge for you guys. You leapt through those. But yeah, when was the first time you guys figured out that have you reached that point yet where you figured that you need to scale up your task force? Do you foresee a point at which that will happen?
We come with an extremely different approach to this. I'll be very, very honest about it. We are currently a 6-member team.
Okay, that's why I wanted to ask this question. Also, because people are looking at the Web3 space as this potential thing. I think 2 reports now have quoted this distinctly, saying that by 2032, Web3 will generate 800,000 jobs in India. That's a very tall claim. But then I'm asking this to every founder: how many jobs do you see yourself creating in the next 10 years?
No, so let me put it this way, right? I mean, we also could be a wrong group to ask this question. We were 6 in October. We are still 6. We didn't hire after that. Our approach to hiring is one where we hire when we see the absolute need to get someone.
This makes my next question much more interesting. Who out of the other? So there are 3 people now that Uh, we've discounted you, Arun, and Abhishek. Amongst the other three, what was the toughest hire that you had? Like, what was the toughest position to fill, and what does this person do in your team?
Arun?
That's an interesting question. So, to be honest, I mean, in a relative scale, I would say the designer has been the toughest to hire, predominantly because we don't know absolutely anything about design. I'll be very straight upfront about it.
It's
None of
not a
us.
skill set which.
So it is. So we found it very hard to evaluate and then even to understand how to evaluate a design person. So first up, we had to. The resume screening itself was like quite a bit of challenge because typically if you talk to a designer, they will show a portfolio, and then for us,
Yes,
like, okay, now what? Like, how do I understand it? Like, what does it mean? So then we started having more and more conversation. Then we roped into. Then we had almost finalized one designer, but then their budget turned out to be like quite out of our range. Then we also spoke to more designers, and then one designer with whom we are working currently, Neeladri. He, for me, like he hit the right mark in terms of process and as well as the showing the end result. So what was happening was either we were getting designers who were very thoroughly process oriented, but
this
when
is
you look at
somebody
the
who
end
looks
result,
at your at your application UI as well, at your end user
yeah,
UI.
yeah, yeah. We just have one designer, no one else. Yeah, yeah. So
It's a
so
6-member
he,
team. The rest of the 5
yeah, yeah.
code,
He
and
does
he
everything.
designs. It's
He
as
does
simple as
everything.
that.
Yeah.
Ah, you,
All the
okay,
design.
I got that. You don't okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So
And
then
Arun
we
and I double up
yeah,
doing the marketing and all those aspects
yeah,
per se.
correct. So yeah, so then we got a couple of our friends, designer friends, to talk to Neeladi and then this person, and then they were all like they were clear that he would be the right fit for the team in terms of what he brings to the table as well as his thought process. So either, as I said, right, like we spoke to designers who had a very elaborate thought process, but there was not much to show as an end result, or vice versa. They would show something which they could not explain. Like why is it that it is there? Because for me, the both of them were equally important for me to understand. For example, if like why is it that you have certain design element in that place? Like please help me understand as a real user. So yeah, so this Neelaji was able to check all the boxes, so to speak. And he's with us right now. I mean, more than 1 year, I think he's been with us. He's been with us from day one, pretty much.
Has he worked in a Web3 landscape prior to working
No,
in this
no,
space?
no,
No.
no,
This is his first
no, no.
Web3.
He
See,
understands the user.
even
Let me put it this way. So he understands humans. He understands the users. Yeah. So then he
That
designs for
makes it
them. So
interesting. So when you hire somebody, I was a non-Web3 person who was brought into the Web3 space at Gravity Capital. So I went through that
yeah,
transition, and then it's an interesting space to discover, and
yeah,
it's an ongoing process even today, right? So
yeah.
no. So in fact,
was it hard
none of us
to?
are Web3 natives per se. I
Yeah,
mean, like if you look at the product, it's not a Web3 native product per se.
yeah,
Yeah, I
It's about
understand.
understanding the space and building something for the space.
Even your potential end users are not necessarily Web3 native. They are people who are picking up the pieces today. And
Could potentially, yeah, you're right.
so one interesting insight that came out of this is the last person I asked this question to, again, the Zaid Finance guy. He listed his toughest hires as the legal and compliance and taxation guys, followed by the designer. And then you are the guys who are solving the compliance and taxation part, and then your toughest hire is the designer. Our designer will be really pleased to see this. This is so that's an interesting industrial level challenge to have. Like if this trend keeps on repeating, I'd be sure to notify all the guys who participated in this poll, sort of.
yeah,
No, so
yeah,
one thing at least I have realized, and I mean, Arun can probably add to it, is in general, Web3 products need a lot more care, a lot more love for consumers to come. The current set of Web3 products kind of, at least from a UX perspective, leave a lot, out there. And a lot could be built. You have this regular narrative that keeps coming along, right? Where are the consumers? Where are the consumer products? Because everyone's building in Web3. Anyone you pick would say, I'm either an infra or I'm a builder. Who's going to use all of these products then, right? So, and one of the reasons why these products
This keeps me
Probably
up.
people
This
aren't
question
using.
keeps me up.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Ev-
I mean they're not probably still in a usable state, and usable state doesn't mean how they look and feel. Usable is a bunch of factors associated. Something that we started the discussion with. If an Uber were to accept it, it becomes usable, right? So that level of usability needs to be driven into Web3, which currently is at a very nascent stage. That is something which needs to be tackled, in my opinion.
So
So I
yeah,
don't
I
know
mean
where I
to
fit into
You'll
your
have more
audience, but so
designers coming in then.
I graduated 12th standard in 2008 to have some reference point. I'm 32 now. I
right.
remember UPI being a tough transition for me. Like UPI was a tough sell on me, and I'm being completely honest. When Tez came out, I wasn't a Tez user. I remember coming on to GPay much later. Like not completely off the band, but like my parents really started using it late, but I wouldn't call myself yet. Uh, uh, I think I'm a potential target user of DeFi products because of the economic interactions that I have. Like I'm placed for that. But how far is that journey in terms of UI and UX principles, fundamental principles evolving to a point that makes it more sensible and more easy, less intimidating for a non-Web3 native person to sort of come in and start using this in their daily lives? How far do you think we are from that stage of adoption in years, if not?
I mean, like look at for reference, right? Like look at credit card adoption. How long did it take for that to happen in India? It is still going on to that
But
for that
if you
matter.
consider that trajectory, like at the stage wherein we have arrived at this suite of products involving Cred and UPI products and Cred Pay, which is an integration, uh, the curve has gone up pretty steep. Like it did not take quite as much time for example, even though I showed initial resistance to Tez, I think, yeah, now I've been using GPay for as long as I can remember. So the curve was pretty steep. Like cash transactions are pretty much out of my life, of my regular lifestyle in Bangalore today. Not something which I would have said was possible maybe even 4 years back. To
Correct,
be very
correct,
honest, at the
correct,
time, demonetization came as a shock to me. Now, it
correct.
wouldn't make quite much as
So,
much of
so
an impact.
great point, right? So demonetization was an inflection point beyond which this took off. So you need such a point to happen, and that point, I'm afraid I won't be able to predict it, but you need such a point to happen in the space
I'm
for
sorry, I got
things to
reminded
take
of
off.
the Balaji Bitcoin bets of some nature, because the taller predictions that are working. I wanted to ask you guys about how you feel about this as well. Like considering the man's reputation, considering so most of the like insightful conversations that have been happening are to do with his intentions behind floating the bet in the first
$1
place.
million challenge.
Yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, I think we were using this thing wherein for the unversed we would explain what the bet is, but I think at this point anybody who's watching this video till this point in time is aware of what we are referring to. So yeah, let's take both of your individual opinions. Why do you think he floated it? Do you think there is any chance in high heavens that this actually ends up happening in the next 20 days or so? For how do you define hyperinflation to your Web2 cousins? And in the event that this does end up happening, what happens to your how does it impact your product and your user base?
yeah. So I think that is one of the most extremely loaded questions. I would say a lot to unpack in that. So I would probably take it in like maybe two or three parts. One is you said that why did he do it? Wha- what he's doing, like bet. So I think in his worldview, he's absolutely clear and convinced that this is going to happen. His conviction levels are, I mean, he's strongly convicted. I mean, that's how it appears to me.
I agree
Having,
with you here. So I've
yeah.
had
So
contradicting opinions coming my way, but this is how I initially felt
yeah,
about it.
I don't think he's out to game the system
In
or
his
as such.
story, this is happening.
I mean, everyone has their worldview, right? Like I have my
Yeah.
own, you have yours, Raghu has his, and then from where he sits and from where he sees the things as he does, for him it's crystal clear, right? Like that this is a done deal. This is going to happen. It's inevitable. It's a matter of time. Literally, that's why he even put a hard end date to it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done it, right? Like he
Yes.
would have kept it vaguely, saying that okay. maybe 1 year down the line it will happen and stuff like that. He said like 90 days, like that's how convinced he is.
And then he moved money
Uh,
into escrow. That was insane.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he's I mean, he wants
That's
to, he's
serious.
convinced and he wants to show that conviction to the rest of the world that he has skin in the game. Like he's not making some random, I mean, you see these charlatans, right? Like a lot of people, influencers, so to speak, they make some random predictions, 10 out of like 8 out of 10 turned out to be false, 2 out of 2 turned out to be
And they're
correct,
almost
kind of
always
correct.
just
They
vested
move on
into
to the,
the.
exactly, they move on to the next 10 things, right? Like he's not one of that, and he wants to show to the world that he's not that, right? Like he is convinced, he wants to have a skin in the game, though he did have a skin in the game. So that's the first part. Now the second part, like how realistic is that going to happen, and what is hyperinflation? So hyperinflation is, I mean, it's happening all over the world even as we speak. Like there's a lot of classic examples, like
Argentina,
the current, there's
currently.
Venezuela, there is Argentina, there is Zimbabwe, Kenya, I think is on the verge of it. So the hyperinflation happens for and I like recent examples, like we have Sri Lanka, and then Pakistan is on the verge of it.
Today,
So
Tim Denning, who's one of the more prolific medium guys that I follow, made a prediction about which sort of it says that it's hyperinflation, but it's going to be disguised really well so that markets don't get impacted quite as much. But at the same,
Uh,
what he's saying is sort of mirroring what Balaji also had to say on the subject regarding the state of the US economy.
yeah, I mean, from my standpoint, from what I see, I mean, to be honest, I'm not a macroeconomic expert. So I'm more of a student of the space more than anything else. So from where I stand, like hyperinflation comes into picture when an economy is not able to sustain on its own, right? Uh, when an economy can sustain only when if it's able to produce something for its own population to consume, and then it can be able to self-sustain on its own. And if you look at the recent failures, kind of failures and then almost failures, right? Like Sri Lanka, one classic example, and then Pakistan is getting there. Sri Lanka was not in a self-sustained manner for a very long time. It was working. I mean, it was kind of surviving. It was hidden because it continuously got the aid money from disguised as loan from China to build all the ports and whatnot. And those debts come with a rider that they had to build the port, so they cannot use that money to build, for example, something that their own
Came with a
people can
quid pro
use,
quo.
right? Right. They had to build the port, and then they have this massive airports which are lying empty, right? Like one of the biggest airports on the south of Equator is in Sri Lanka. No one uses it to this date because there is nothing, no one goes there, and so to speak. So yeah, so this got hidden because of the aid, and then when COVID stuck, it acted as a catalyst. The raw material had been accumulated over 1 decade, and then COVID acted as a catalyst to tip over the Sri Lankan economy to the over the edge. And similar thing has been happening with Pakistan for that matter, right? Like it has been surviving on either debt money or aid money, either from IMF or from China, because there is no economic activity that is happening in China in Pakistan, which is sustaining its own citizens. Like they have to literally import strong currency from the outside world to survive. And it has gotten into negative spiral, right? Like because the best people there don't stay there, they just go out. They don't build the economy, they don't create the jobs, they don't produce anything of value. So I'm giving you sort of higher level picture of why would hyperinflation set in. Now the question to ask is US in the similar situation right now?
Yeah.
Right. And if I paint, to be honest, when I painted a picture like this, I want the answer to be obvious. Obviously it's not. Like, so that's my take. But the time will tell.
like at least within the 90-day duration that somebody's put a bet on, obviously not.
Oh yeah, that was
It takes a lot more. It takes a lot more.
So I wanted
Yeah.
to understand how outrageous this claim was. So I asked Harshal this question, like, what do you think will happen in the world if this this impossible thing really ends up happening? He said there'd be riots, and now what you said makes sense. So if the US economy goes into that state, then
riots, right? Like you saw what happened in China, like not Sri
China.
Lanka. Like
In
the
Sri Lanka,
people
yeah.
stormed the presidential building. I mean, the president had to literally run.
Let me
Uh,
actually flip it and put it. The world can ill afford to have, US in a certain state. It's not just US alone.
Interesting.
That's how I'd look at it. So no,
I
it's
get
it's
that
nowhere on
because
the
it's
horizon.
sort of the world's reserve currency in a way for everybody,
exactly,
for all the
exactly.
people who
Yeah,
end
it
up getting
hasn't
paid.
been dethroned, right? Technically, I mean, all this
And
good news, so-called good news that we hear, but the fact still remains that it hasn't been dethroned.
It hasn't.
There are
and
few
and
countries which are. Sorry, go ahead, Arun.
yeah. So I was saying, I was itching to say something, which is like if you, and this is not a new thing that's happening, by the way. So every once or twice every 10 years, there is going to be a rumor that sets out saying that okay, US dollars is on the verge of collapse. So I'll tell you when it has happened in the past. So in 2022, last year, when the Russian invasion happened, and the Russia was cut off from the USD network. So there was an uproar saying that okay, this is the end of US dollar. And before that, 2008, just before the 2008 great financial crisis, one of the biggest things that was on the mind of the economists and the policy thinkers at that point in time was collapse of US dollar, because at that point in time China was holding a lot of US currency because of exports and so on. And then again, it happens like a clockwork twice in every decade. There is
Ah,
there is a history of rumors around US dollar collapsing, but what has happened is exactly the reverse. US has only gone from strength to strength. So this is the reality, as opposed to the rumors that have been floating around.
so as far as its position is because I was looking at this now, I don't know if we'll be able to pull up the graphic in the edit there, but there's this interesting graph about what you could buy with $1 and how that has changed over the years, which is I think you may have seen that graphic in one of the other places, and it's done up on a dollar map image. But what you're saying is, as far as its position is concerned, in terms of being the world's preferred reserve currency, that has never really been in question.
Perhaps that was never in question, right? Like
Not to
one is
date for
what you
sure.
spoke about. Correct. So what you spoke about is more of a inflation. The purchasing power of $1 that has obviously gone down. That is how fiat currencies work. Fiat currencies by definition have to be deflationary, otherwise it cannot work as a currency. Again, it's a long theory about it. Like don't want to digress. So it has to be sort of inflationary. Oh, sorry, yeah, the fiat currency has to be inflationary for it to work. So that's going to happen. But you look at the strength of US dollar compared to other currencies, right? That is the true test of a currency. Like where does a currency stand among its peers, right? Not against US dollar versus burger, or US dollar versus gold, right? That will continue to inflate. Like the purchasing power of $1 will keep going down. But how is US dollar performing compared to all the other currencies in the world? I mean, it's not even a question, to be honest, right? Like it has gone from strength to strength. And interestingly, in times of volatility, the demand for US dollar goes through the roof. Like I don't know how many of the people remember when the COVID stuck in the just before. I mean, the stock markets crashed in March 2020 when the world was shut down. And and the currency markets panicked, the bond markets panicked, and all the panic was happening literally because every single money manager in the world was selling everything and then buying US dollar, because they knew
Understandably
that
so. Yeah.
US dollar is
If
the
all
strongest one. To
trade
the
comes to a
extent,
halt during that apocalyptic vision, yeah, people would still want to stay liquid in
exactly, and
USD.
to the extent the oil prices went negative, like something that no one could wrap their head around it, right? Like why would like how is it possible that oil prices can even go negative? Like what does it mean? Right? So so these are the kinds of things happen when it will show you, in terms of uncertainty. We have the live examples. That's what I'm trying to quote here. The live example where, in terms of uncertainty, US dollar goes only from strength to strength, not the other way around.
Now coming back to the original question regarding the predictions regarding mainstream adoption, and then I also wanted to touch upon the subject of how much do you think lobbying factors in, like, do you think that there's an actual play for that in the coming decade in India? I'll let probably Raghu take the question on predictions as far as mainstream adoption is concerned. I think we were roundabout that when we digressed to
Yeah.
biologic.
So I mean, see, mainstream. It's chicken and egg, as I was mentioning just a while ago, right? Mainstream adoption is a function of multiple things that crypto can perform. First up, we need to decide if it's a currency or or a security. It currently masquerades as both, and that's where the problem is, right? So that's one of the problems. But see, for it to be adopted in a mainstream fashion, it needs to become a payment mode. And if it becomes a payment mode, is it really a security then? So that's something that you'd have to sort out for. And the moment it's not a security, it is stabilized. So in that sense, if you were to ask me this question, I believe stables have a better chance of mainstream adoption before the rest of the crypto world. And in fact, stables should ideally form that bridge. Even going, it continues to, it is the case, it continues to, form that bridge between, the real world assets and what lies on the other side of the market. So that's one thing. The second thing is for it to be, adopted in a more mainstream fashion, people need to probably start behaving more maturely. And this, I don't know how to put it. Like, I mean, you look at the number of scams, you look at the number of
Oh
rug pulls
yes.
that keep happening day in, day out. I
Well,
mean,
I am personally
see,
fed up of this beacons.ai thing. I mean, a bunch of, I'm sure you would have noticed this on your Twitter feed. People tag you, and then there's this
yeah,
fake airdrop thing that comes.
yeah,
Sui
yeah, yeah.
Network, I believe, somebody set up an exact replica. It was like, it was artistically perfect, the exact replica of the website, and you wouldn't figure out. And there's a connect wallet button there promising an airdrop, and that is happening. It's
No, so see, I'm all in for decentralization in that sense. I mean, I love what folks wanted, but where is grievance redressal? What happens if somebody loses money, right? You're like
that is one of
kaput.
the bigger
You're blank.
decentralization questions that
And
came
where
up.
would you go to if that happens, right? I mean, for what it's worth, currently you pay your taxes, you utilize all the the utility that government's providing to you, and those are the guys that you'd question, and you walk up to them and say, look, I lost money, in a rug pull, and be like, did we even ask you to invest in it in the first place?
See,
So
by definition, there is no central authority. There's no one person or entity that's accountable for your loss if this ends up happening.
so
So
exactly, so these need to happen gradually. This can't happen obviously overnight, and this can happen only if people start behaving maturely. The space, unfortunately, doesn't have that level of maturity right now, so that needs to kick in my opinion.
that's one of those blind gray spots, grievance redressals. We were discussing multiple things. So, for example, the conversation was around Web2 businesses, of today, that are not worth decentralizing, and for n number of cons. So, we were looking at the doorstep food delivery model, reasons not to
Mhm.
decentralize, and we figured that customer support and grievance redressal would become a nightmare because there's nobody taking up that mantle now. And that's just in one particular consumer area. In mobility, the same thing applies.
Mhm.
If you decentralize mobility in its entirety, you face that challenge today of there being no central authority for addressing.
Anything completely decentralized will have this problem, which is why, I mean, we were of a firm opinion when we founded Descrypt. We were of a firm opinion that for the space to grow, to be more mainstream, it needs both centralized and decentralized entities to grow. We weren't of an opinion that, Binance is I mean, few people kind of say that, right? But, and we were like, no, Binance has to exist. What are you
No,
saying? I mean, if Binance
I use
shuts
Binance when
down,
it comes to, like, I'm just making a
I know
personal
it. I mean,
confession, Evan.
that's
Bulk
that's
of
the
my money
funny
I
part,
trust
right? I
Binance
mean,
there.
that's the funny part. I mean, you walk into a TG channel, everyone's, kind of farting on Binance and saying, oh, yeah, it's good riddance, etc. But the moment they're off the channel, I'm pretty sure they would have on-ramped using Binance, or they would have been actually. It's very funny. I mean, people need to be real. People need to, be more mature. Uh, that is highly necessary for the space to grow.
as far, I mean, if you make analogies, we are not, so we're in that stage wherein when the internet was evolving, there was a stage when the IT guys came out. I don't know if you relate. There was a sitcom that like one
Yeah,
season
I
or two
know,
season
I
went,
know.
and people had a general idea of what, like, you could still get off with a prank saying, this box is the internet, and that happened. And yeah, when somebody says, here's the SUI airdrop, connect your wallet, that's what I see. This box is the internet. And then and people falling for it, and then people signing off the wallet.
So
So
exactly,
how
right?
long
So
do you think this phase lasts? Again, you guys are well
I, I,
positioned to
I
answer this because you've seen through one era of digital payment adoption. So this is
you
just
you
another.
have you have some advantage currently. I mean, and you have so much of a social interaction embedded that the word spreads quickly. Good or bad spreads quicker, right? So yeah, in that sense, probably it will be expedited when compared to the other like digital payments, for instance, right? Taking off to quite some time. If you were to compare to that, probably this would be quicker. But then again, I mean, I can't put my finger to something and say it'll happen in the next 2 years or 3 years. It probably happens once the regulators are comfortable with it. Once people and regulators will be comfortable if people behave maturely. No one wants to. So that's where the problem lies.
Our I mean, speaking of, when I say our or us, I'm referring to the mainstream consumer, which is a bit more layman in nature than the Web3 native audience. When what's and this is purely speculative, again, it's a guess. You guys both mentioned, you and the previous founder mentioned, that design is a challenge for Web3 founders. And I remember thinking to myself, and I saw that exactly mirrored SUI website, there's a lot of design and skilled design and dev talent that is going into the Web3 hacks that is happening right now. People are
True.
actually, it's like that scenario you've seen Fuzzy on Prime, right? The skilled the forger gets lured into this money for the easy into this business for the easy money.
Hmm.
That's actually happening right now. And
True.
Okay, so I think once institutional capital plays a more liberal role in terms of shaping up, so that really helps companies go ahead and expand on their
That's
design.
for an entirely different day, institutional capital. But yeah, I mean, yeah.
Oh yeah, there is. I want to have that conversation with you. That's the elephant in the room conversation for like, startups and investment firms right now. There is a meme doing the round. Chandler holds up the phone and says,
Mhm.
"Yeah, this is so pre-seed," and could this be any more pre-seed? And we want to go ahead and so I like where this discussion is heading. Yeah, we'll call it. We'll call it an episode in about 5 or 10 minutes from now. We've clearly, but this was interesting, right? We like to do this again. One of the possibilities that I want to leave open right now is having like multiple founders sort of discussion wherein we have converging and diverging ideas on the
Yeah,
same plate.
yeah.
And interestingly, I wanted to ask you, and this is by no means an effort to get you guys to say or comment anything on camera, but do you think it's too early in the world to have a talk show episode saying Kunal on Web3 and have his opinions about the decentralized space and where he fits in, and probably have the two of you as part of the conversation, considering your exposure into the space and your history with him? Can we make something
Well,
like that
yeah,
happen?
if he has the bandwidth, sure.
Yeah, yeah. I
We'll
think
have
that
to
the,
think
the
about
only
it, but
question
sure,
is
he
I'm
that
has the
actively
bandwidth.
going to chase you to see if we can
the
make
no,
that
no.
happen.
I mean, our bandwidth as well as Kunal's bandwidth,
Yeah, of course.
it's only limited by his bandwidth.
That's it.
I mean, I don't think it's too early at all. In fact, I would say it's already too late.
Oh, then
So we should have
let's
had
get cracking on it then.
absolutely,
Let's
absolutely,
bring it.
absolutely, absolutely,
So
absolutely would love to
that'll
that
be the
because
that'll be one of the agendas of my next podcast episodes with you guys. We're trying to do thematic seasons right now. We're doing Humans of Web3 to understand your individual nuances, which led you here. And thank you so much
yeah,
for this. This was a very
yeah, no
exciting
worries,
episode for me.
no
And
worries.
yeah, Raghu. So I look forward to speaking to you guys again. Any message that you guys want to leave for Graviton's viewers in terms of Descrypt or a call out that you guys want to make?
More than Descrypt, I mean, like, just keep building. At least for the guys who are building products out there, and start using.
Yeah,
Drive more adoption. That's how the space will potentially grow. Just building it isn't enough.
Understood. Okay, I think for those of us watching, thank you for consuming this entire episode. You guys should check out descrypt.com to understand how Descrypt and team is changing the crypto taxation space. Be sure to check out gravitonaccelerator.com and follow us on @joingraviton on Twitter. Engage with us, show us some love, and tell us if you want to get featured on one of these podcast episodes. We want to speak to everybody who's making a tangible impact in the Web3 space. More often than you might want, than you might imagine. We want to keep doing this over and over again. And Raghu, like you said, let's stay in touch to understand what are some of the deeper questions that we can tackle, and potentially get Big Man K out here on one of the episodes.
Sure. Sounds good. Thanks for having us
Thank you
here.
so much, Sean.
Thanks.
Have a good one. Bye.
Have a good one.
Have a good one. Bye.